My vice chair is going to be on WebEx listening here in a little bit. He's having a little problem with IT, I think, was what was going on. Yeah. Senator Bowser, he's gone. And today, Senator Clifford has a special guest that he'd like to introduce.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like my new intern, Martinez Ponce from Garden City, America, to stand up. He's a K-State student. He'll be here with me this semester. Welcome to the committee.
Well, I'm always excited. Today we have an update from Southwest Power Pool, and some of the new people on here might find that very interesting. We got Mike Ross, which is Senior Vice President, External Affairs and Stakeholder, Southwest Power Pool. Some of us have been down and seen the place, been around Mike before, and we're excited that you're here, Mike. So if you want to step up and do your name and make sure the mic's on, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mike Ross, Senior Vice President, External Affairs for Southwest Power Pool, and thank you for the invitation to come and provide an update today. And for the new committee members, I'll try to share with you a little bit about who we are, what we do, and how we serve the good citizens of Kansas. So let's jump right into it. Feel free to stop me at any time, or we can do questions at the end, whatever's the pleasure of the chairman. So our mission, working together to responsibly and economically keep the lights on today and in the future, and our visions leading our industry to a brighter future while delivering the best energy value. And we'll hopefully be able to describe to you today how we do that for Kansas. I won't go through all this, but the bottom line is we've been coordinating power since 1941, and we've evolved as the industry and technology have over the last 83, 84 years now. And despite what my grandchildren may think, I have not been doing this for the 84 years. Our major services, I won't go through all those, but today we'll touch on what I call the big three. One is keeping the lights on, operating the grid, if you will, 24/7. Facilitating the wholesale electric market, and then planning transmission, the high voltage transmission lines. That falls is our responsibility as well. Very important here, things we are not responsible for. I like to say that we're not responsible for any of the things that are controversial. We don't site transmission. We plan for transmission, but then whoever's building it works with their local state regulators and others, depending on which state and the state laws on how it gets sited or where it's actually the path it takes. Generation, we don't get to choose what type of generation is built, whoever is investing in that generation and building it. And oftentimes they have to do that in collaboration or in a process where they get approval through, in Kansas would be the Kansas Corporation Commission. Different states have different rules on that, of course. We don't plan generation, we don't site generation, I'm sorry. And then transmission generation construction's not us, and transmission generation permitting's not us. So what is our role? You know, a good analogy is air traffic controllers. They don't own the airport, the sky, the runways, the taxiways, or the airlines or the planes, but they direct it all, right? And so we don't own the transmission lines, we don't own the generation, it's our members that do. And in Kansas, our members include the Kansas Board of Public Utilities, Evergy, Midwest, Sunflower. We work closely with the Kansas Electric Cooperatives, of course, ITC, and did I miss one again, Mr. Commissioner? Let's see. I think I covered. Those are the members in Kansas that we work with. And so here's some of the things that we do. Let's go on to the next slide here. That's the region we serve, and these regional transmission organizations, commonly referred to as RTOs, are independent system operators, ISOs, that basically do the same thing. You can't just decide you want to be one. You're designated by the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. You operate off of a tariff that makes its way up and gets approved by FERC, but everything in the tariff is actually written starting at the local level through our members committee and through what we call our regional state committee that I'm going to talk more about here in a minute. For our region, and you may note, I like to say that it looks a little bit like a Texas congressional redistricting map, and that's because electricity is traveling at nearly the speed of light. It does not know state boundaries. It knows transmission line boundaries, and so that's why these different RTO regions, very few states are in one RTO. Many states are in two RTOs. Kansas is strictly NSPP, and we're proud of that. In our region, over 500,000 square miles, 18 million people, almost 1,000 generating plants, and over 5,000 substations. A lot of infrastructure to keep up with. So our members, I just mentioned who they are in Kansas, but if you drill down in terms of load-serving entities, about a third of our members are electric cooperatives, about a third are municipal systems, and about a third are investor-owned utilities. And then you have transmission owners like ITC based here in Kansas. And we have state agencies that are members and various other organizations, as you can see there. And so the regional state committee, so basically everything that ends up in our tariff, and I kind of compare it to the legislature, we have what's called a Markets and Operations Policy Committee. And every member of SPP has someone at the table. And they follow Robert's Rules of Order, and they offer amendments, and they debate issues. And if they approve a change to the tariff, then it goes to the regional state committee, and that consists of a state regulator from each state that we represent. A lot of RTOs do not have the governance structure the way we do. We thought it was important to keep decisions with the states. And so you'll be proud to know that Chairman Andrew French represents the state of Kansas as the state regulator on the SPP Regional State Committee, and in fact is the immediate past president and has a lot of respect in the organization. But so these policies work their way up eventually to our members committee and board. So the Markets and Operations Policy Committee is a lot like the House of Representatives. And then the members and board committee, it's our members committee that meets side by side with our independent board of directors. They're more like the Senate. And then I would say the regional state committee is more like our governor, I guess, if you will. There's certain authorities they have that our independent board do not have, and they're listed right here. Cost allocation for transmission upgrades, new transmission lines. That methodology is determined solely by the regional state committee, the state regulators within our region. Resource adequacy and transmission rights are among some of the authorities that rest with them. And so our fuel mix last year, that's what it looked like. 38% of our energy last year came from wind. 28% came from gas. For the first time, gas is now our #2 fuel source. It surpassed coal. Gas is becoming a bigger part of our equation, as you can see. Coal's at 24%. Nuclear, thanks to Kansas largely, is at 5%. Hydro, 3%. Solar and other, which would include battery storage, are just a blip at this time, but as you'll see in a minute, we're starting to see more investments in those emerging technologies as well. So what did Kansas contribute to the grid last year? There's the numbers that, as you can see, 51% of the generation coming out of Kansas onto the grid is wind, followed by coal and nuclear and gas. As you can see on the right-hand side of the screen, you generate more than you need most of the time. And that's why being part of a regional market is so important. You're able to not only sell that excess power, but you're able to move it across multiple transmission lines with multiple owners. And we facilitate that transaction compared to the old days when you had to pick up the phone If you had 4 transmission owners, you'd have to call all 4 to see if they had room on their line and negotiate a separate rate with each of them. And you get down the line to the 4th one, and they say, sorry, we don't have room today, then you start all over again. And so that doesn't happen because of the seamless process we're able to facilitate. That's another way of looking at it in terms of energy production by fuel type. As you can see, since 2017, wind's gone up 87%, but look at gas, it's gone up 62%. A substantial increase in the amount of gas generation on the grid, and those two are related, and I've got a graph here in a minute where I'll talk about the importance of gas to address the variability wind and plays a critical role in keeping the lights on. And of course, no surprise, coal continues to decline, not just in our region, but nationally. And that's a look at Kansas and what's going on with Kansas and the same type of thing. And I won't go over that, but I wanted you to have a copy of it to see what's going up and what's going down. And then, so all this wind, where's it coming from? Well, Kansas. Again, we don't get to decide what's built, but it's our job to keep the lights on with whatever is built, and that can be a challenge sometimes. And in fact, we recently issued what we call our generational challenge report, where we talk about there is a need for more energy coming from sources that aren't variable, if you will, what we call dispatchable generation. That's the way of saying that we need more gas generation, if you will. Oklahoma leads the region in the amount of wind on the system, closely followed by Kansas. And that's another way of looking at your exports. As you can see there, 29% of the time, Kansas is exporting energy. 11% of the time, though, you're importing energy. And quite frankly, a lot of that would be when the wind's just not blowing that much. Or it could be during one of these weather events. And so this right here, I think, paints a pretty good picture about why a diverse fuel mix is important. Not only do we have to forecast how much power is needed tomorrow and make sure the generation's there to match it, we're having to forecast the wind, and we're having to do that days, if not weeks, in advance, and we've got to be pretty close to accurate. In this instance, we forecast it, so there was no reliability event. But the wind dropped 14,000 megawatts in 4 hours. Now, let me put that in perspective. That meant that in 4 hours, we needed to crank up 28 large coal or gas plants to compensate for that. And that's why gas plays such a critical role in addressing the variability of wind. And as you see more wind go in the system, you're seeing more gas go in the system because those fast start, quick start natural gas units that range usually from 25 to 200 megawatts. Those smaller ones, you can push a button and they're running almost at nameplate capacity within 5 minutes. And that's what we use to address the variability of the wind largely. But we also use the larger units when you have a sizable drop like you see there. Again, just demonstrates the importance for a diverse fuel mix. So what does the future look like? Again, we don't get to decide what's built, but we're required to do a study on how that generation would reliably connect to the grid. Can that transmission line it's going to connect to handle additional load? If or additional generation, if it can't, then there's got to be an upgrade to that line or a new line built. So we're required to do the study. So we kind of see what's coming. And so what does the future look like? A lot of solar, a lot of battery storage, some more wind. But I would point out that the gas generation, while it's only about 11,618, I say only, that's substantial. Before we issued this generational challenge report and tweaked a few other things, it was under 1,000 megawatts, if my memory serves me correct. And so we're starting to see more and more natural gas electric generation being built. And one of the other things that in the past, a generator has nameplate capacity. And a lot of the decisions were made around nameplate. And now we've gone to accredited capacity. In other words, you can have a 100-megawatt wind farm, but if historically it's putting out 20 megawatts, it's going to get accredited at 20 megawatts. If you've got a natural gas plant that has a nameplate of 100 megawatts, and historically it's putting out 95 megawatts, it's going to get accredited at 95. So as we get more demand for electricity, and as we see more weather events, and as we, as a result, need to raise what we call the planning reserve margin, so all of our members that are load-serving entities, they've got to bring enough generation to the pool, if you will, to meet their peak, plus an additional 15%. And that's going to 16% next year. And so more and more folks are looking toward investing in natural gas, because if you know, quite frankly, we've got a lot of wind today, and there will be more, as you saw on this slide. But in terms of meeting reserve margins, you can build 100 megawatts of wind and you may get accredited at 20, or you can build 100 of gas and get accredited for 95. And that's why you're starting to see more and more investments in natural gas generation. And so the markets, basically, I kind of already explained how the transmission service market works. The integrated marketplace has two components, the day-ahead market. So, for example, this morning we're forecasting the load on what's going to be needed tomorrow, and then the generators across our footprint that want to run tomorrow, they bid in. And that ensures lowest cost generation runs first. But also, very important, there's a reliability component to it. They're making a commitment that they're going to show up tomorrow. And so that is an important part of our day-ahead market, making sure we're going to have the load to meet demand. And then the real-time balancing market, look, these are big machines, they can break. And so maybe we miss a wind forecast by 1 or 2%, but if it's a real windy day, that could be the equivalent of one large coal or gas plant, right? So the real-time balancing market fills in the gaps, if you will, and unlike Wall Street, it settles every 5 minutes. And so that's the real-time balancing market. And then for several years now, we've been involved in offering a Western energy imbalance service market in the West. It's not connected to our region, but we're facilitating that in the West and beginning to do more in the West that I'll get to in a moment. So just some quick facts on the market. Big numbers, about $35 billion in marketplace settlements last year. And I'll just, transmission market, I've already pretty much explained how that works and the benefits of it. So we'll go on. And this right here, I think, is very important. We have the lowest wholesale electric rates in the United States. That's not coming from us, it's coming from FERC and the data that they analyze. But SPP is, in terms of the wholesale electric rate, is what, about $32? Look at Texas, $79. Look at California, $69. So we're real proud of that. And then transmission and SPP to date, dating back to 2006, we've put about $15 billion in upgrading transmission. Not us, but our members are doing it, but we direct it based on studies we do, and to connect new generation. About $15 billion in new transmission since 2006, but just in the last year, an additional $7.7 billion worth of transmission has been built because we're seeing unprecedented load growth. 2 years ago, our peak load was 5% above the year before. Last year it was 5% above the year. So we've seen a 10% growth in peak load just in the last 2 years. And as this economy becomes more electrified, President Trump has a real commitment to data centers that he's been talking about and announcing, and these require a lot of power. So we're going to see an unprecedented need for additional generation in the years ahead. Those are projects constructed or with notices to construct. As you can see there, Kansas has been a big winner. Quite frankly, a lot of that was to connect the wind build out in Kansas to get the power from where it's made to where it's needed. And then that's the planned expansion. A lot of other planned expansions in Kansas. And so who pays for those? And so this methodology was determined by the Regional State Committee, the one that Mr. Chairman French sits on today. And so for the big lines, the region pays 100%. So while y'all have gotten a disproportionate share of transmission in Kansas, the entire region has helped pay for that. You're not footing the bill alone. And so that's for the 300 kV and above. 100 to 300 kV, the local zone pays 2/3 and the region pays 1/3. And then of course the smaller lines, the local pays 100% on those. Those large lines benefit the entire region, therefore the entire region pays. And then right there, if you see the dark green, that's where our RTO is expanding to the west. You know, all of our members, there's no state law mandating that folks join an RTO. They've done it over time because of the benefits and the savings it creates for their end-use customers. And so 2/3 of the country is in an RTO. The third that's not is primarily in the West. And quite frankly, they've got two choices. Us, and we operate the DC ties that connect the East and the West, or California, where their board's appointed solely by Gavin Newsom. So as you can imagine, a lot of the West is very interested in joining SPP, and we're glad to be having them. And so a lot of Colorado, Wyoming, Utah, Arizona, more of Wyoming and Montana will be joining the RTO next year. Tandem to that, we're offering a contract service for those that see the value, but they want to walk a little bit slower before they run. And so they've signed up for what we call Markets Plus, totally independent of the RTO, won't have any impact on Kansas. We'll just be facilitating a day ahead in a real-time market for a lot of entities in the West, starting probably in 2027. But the ones that are joining the RTO, there's a benefit there, several benefits. One, y'all have so much excess power, you'll have another place to move it to and sell it. The other thing is the time zone difference between us and them changes when the peaks happen, which benefits both systems. And then there's more in terms of what it costs to operate. There'll be more entities to spread the cost among. So we're excited about the growth that we're seeing there. That's the benefit that we provided. We haven't calculated 2024 yet, but in 2023, $3.62 billion in savings for our members and their customers in our 14-state region. And those aren't our numbers. It's a methodology that our members have approved that we use to determine the value we provide to the people of Kansas and throughout our region. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I'll be glad to try and answer any questions that.
So you got Andrew to back you up here.
I do.
Clean up if he says anything bad about it.
Okay. Senator Clay, your first up.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for that great presentation. I really appreciate it. And I trade options, and a big part of trading options is volatility. So I have a very intuitive sense of volatility or variance. And, you know, I think about wind, and wind is great. Obviously, we are a big part of that, but it's volatile in the sense that in its output, how much it puts out. But natural gas is volatile in the sense that its price. And in fact, those of us that trade options call natty gas, we call it the widowmaker, because it'll blow you out if you're not careful. Anyway, when you're looking at, you know, diverse energy solutions, obviously, you know, having a nice basket of several different kinds is nice. And I recognize you don't build, but you are steeped in this topic and knowledgeable about it. So, you know, if I were to make you king of the day and you could build something, would you build more wind? Would you build more solar? Would you build more coal, or would you build a nuclear? What are your thoughts on our current? So what I'm really asking is, and it is a serious question, you know, I think there's a tipping point where our mix maybe has too much of the volatile and not enough of the stable, right? So I'm just wondering what your thoughts are on that.
So we facilitate the wholesale electric market. So we have to be fuel neutral to a certain degree. Now, having said that, we have issued this generational challenge report where we say that we need more dispatchable generation. And quite frankly, it really doesn't matter at the federal level whether we have leadership that's pro-coal or anti-coal. The reality is that banks just aren't loaning money for coal anymore. And by the way, I used to be in the U.S. House of Representatives, and before that I was in the state Senate in Arkansas for 10 years. And so I'd be remiss if I didn't say thank you for your service and the sacrifices y'all make and your families make. I tell you that to tell you when I was in Congress, the last coal plant built in America was built in my district. And I was proud of it. I fought hard and beat Northeast Texas out of it and got it in Southwest Arkansas. As a result, it'll probably be the last coal plant standing in America, right? Because it's the newest, it's the cleanest. But the truth is banks just won't loan money on coal anymore, and that's one of the reasons we haven't seen any more built, which leaves us with a couple of options, right? And when you talk about dispatchable generation, one is nuclear. And the first nuclear power plant built since the 70s was recently completed in Georgia at a cost in excess of $30 billion for about 2,000 megawatts. You could build 2,000 megawatts of gas for $4 to $5 billion. And so no one's running toward nuclear right now. Having said that, I think that could be a model. One of the reasons it had so many cost overruns and so many delays and took forever is because it's the first time one's been built in 50 years. And if we could get it down to a cookie cutter model, and maybe slightly smaller than 2,000 megawatts, you might see a new entrance in nuclear. A lot of talk now about small modular nuclear reactors, right? And I think they're part of the future. But quite frankly, we're probably looking at 10 years out before we see one that's energized in our region, if not in America. I think some of the first places you may see those is military bases. That leaves us with natural gas, right? And so I think that's why you're starting to see more and more natural gas generation built. And so basically in our report, when we say we need more dispatchable generation, if you follow all the dots, basically that leaves us with natural gas generation.
Sure.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would note on the Georgia case, Volt 3 and Volt 4 were the two new ones that they put on, and one of the reasons why they had cost overruns. There were many, and some of them are very bureaucratic. And I believe last year, the year before, there's a bipartisan bill to clean up some of the regulation on nuclear energy. And second, Westinghouse in I believe 2017 went bankrupt, and I think that also set them behind a little bit and created a lot of cost overruns. And I just don't want to scare people away from the price. I know it was a cost overrun, but I just wonder how many of those are still relevant to this day. But I mean, it sounds to me like you, and you can, tell me if I'm misreading what you're saying, but you do have the same concern that there's a volatility issue when it comes to price and generation. Is that right?
Every type of fuel source has its pros and cons. I mean, they really do.
Well, they don't all have volatility issues, though. I mean, the price of coal is it doesn't seem to move around a whole lot, and those things, they seem to just pump out the same. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong. I'm happy to learn more, but.
And there's no real, but it's not just the volatility, it's also the reliability, in terms of looking at the entire package. There's really no fuel cost for wind, and the wind's great when the wind blows, but, we've got over 35,000 megawatts of wind, and a year ago last summer, one day we were getting 110 megawatts out of it. Now, some days it's serving 100% of the load in Kentucky and in Kansas, and some days it's serving 85% of the load across our 14 states. So I'm not dismissing that. One of the reasons we have the lowest wholesale electric rates in America is largely because of wind. But you've got to have a diverse fuel mix for those days when we're not getting as much out of it as we do other days.
Senator Clifford.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and Congressman or Senator Ross, thank you for being here.
It's just
sorry I missed the tour last summer or so when I was in the House. I went to Germany instead.
Good for you. I promise you had more fun.
It was interesting. Who pays is always an issue, and I know on that 2/3, 1/3 on the 100 to 300 kilovolt lines. FERC ruled one way, and then they reversed it, and they went back. Where are we at on that ruling? Because I'm in far southwest Kansas.
Right.
Sunflowers in my.
So there was some lines built that were not part of, and I'm not an expert on this, but there were some lines built in Midwest and Sunflower that were not part of the regional cost sharing. With FERC's ruling, it's my understanding they're now in a process. If they haven't already, they're in the process of those lines being part of the regional share.
Follow up? So it would flip to the 100% then? Is that what you're telling me, or it'd be?
Depending on the size of the line.
Okay. So the new ones are likely to be the 345 lines?
Or 345, they're going to be regionally shared. But there's going to be some things, and I think Midwest is here somewhere, and Commissioner May can answer this. I understand that basically we're doing retro on some of them. And that, you want to speak to it?
Chairman. Andrew French with the KCC, and yeah, if you've got complaints about cost allocation, I'm the one that sits on that board that has to vote on it. So on that particular issue, you're right, there was an initiative at SPP to take a look at all the lines that have been built and see if there were any of those sort of mid-sized lines that were being paid 2/3 by the local area that actually were benefiting the whole region. And they found basically 4 projects. They were all actually within the sunflower area. Midwest didn't have any that qualified. And those were benefiting the region. So what SPP did, you're right, there was a lot of back and forth. We made multiple filings at the FERC. They flip-flopped at different times, but finally have approved us changing that from a 2/3 to the local zone to 100% to the whole region, because we were able to demonstrate that, you know, that low-cost wind energy was getting on those lines and being sent across the whole region, and the whole region was benefiting. So right now, they have approval. I will tell you, that is, though, in the federal courts on appeal. So we'll see if it comes back. We're hopeful it won't. The KCC is intervened in those appeals and on behalf of Kansans.
Thank you. Thanks for that answer. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. Senator Thompson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mike. If we do expand then on that sharing issue out to California, how much transmission are we going to be on the hook for on that? I know it's a portion of it, but if you've got a long transmission line, that could run into a lot of money for the state.
Right. You're talking about the expansion into Wyoming and Colorado? And,
Probably California even.
no, no, they have their own.
Do they?
Yeah, California has their own RTO that's kind of like a state agency.
Oh, okay.
That their governor appoints the entire board. And so that's why a lot of other states do not want to join California, among other reasons, is they'd be controlled by a board appointed by the governor of California.
It's a problem.
Yeah.
No, I misheard you. I thought you were talking about expanding out to California.
No.
Oh, okay.
It's everybody else in the West wants to join us because they don't like California.
Very good. Quick question on the marginal reserve requirements. Do you anticipate that continuing to rise?
We will continue to do studies. So it went from 12 to 15%, and it's going to 16% next year.
I'd heard 25% at one time. I can't remember when, maybe a year or two ago, that somebody was surmising that it may end up that high, but.
Yeah, there's a winter, they're going to start setting a winter one too. So, I mean, the summer was actually the summer used to be at 14 or 15, and at one time we dropped it to 12 because studies showed that was all we needed. And then loads, like I said, the peak load's up 10% in 2 years. So it's turned around pretty rapidly the last few years. So we went to 15%, from 12 to 15, and then next year we go to 16 on the summer. The winter, starting in 2026, I believe it'd be 36%, which sounds like a lot, but load's lower in the winter. And in those shoulder months in the spring and falls when a lot of units are down for maintenance, whether they be transmission or generation. So, but we'll continue to do the studies to determine, you know, we're not going to raise it unless we feel like we've got to do it to keep the lights on for reliability reasons.
And would you consider battery storage dispatchable or non?
So battery storage, it probably depends on who you ask.
Yeah.
I will tell you this, that I think there's a place for batteries. And quite frankly, a lot of these wind farms, so the demand for electricity is lowest at night. And the wind blows the most at night. And so a lot of wind gets curtailed at night. If you could curtail that wind power into these batteries at night and then call on those batteries the next day during peak, and if they're situated at the wind farm, then hopefully you can use the same transmission line with either no or slight upgrades to the line, so you benefit from that as well. It makes a lot of sense, but it's not the cure-all, because a 4-hour battery, and maybe someday they're longer, but right now it's about a 4-hour battery, and these extreme weather events that move through usually last 2 or 3 days. So, you know, I guess it would help you the first 4 hours, and then if you're short on power, there's no power to recharge the battery. So, but I think there's a role and a place for batteries, and I guess it would be dispatchable for the 4-hour for the 4 hours worth of power in it, but after that it would not be. So it depends on, I'm not an expert on that. I'm not sure how it would come down. Probably not considered dispatchable unless you had an asterisk that said dispatchable for 4 hours.
I just thought that interconnects number was pretty high for battery storage. That's what brought that question to mind. So thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mike.
Thank you.
Senator Holcher?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for being here. My question is this: when you look at the different states that are part of the Southwest Power Pool, and you're looking at the various energy generation, and in particular, I was just looking at solar, and out of those states, I think we rank last or maybe close to last in terms of solar generation. Can you tell me, is that due to certain restrictions by state, or what are you seeing that's making a difference there?
We have very little solar overall on the system today. It's a very small, let's see, I don't want to tell you wrong. Yeah, it's less than 0.5% today. That's region-wide. And in Kansas, it's 0.1%. But no, there's no restrictions. I mean, we don't get to decide what kind of generation's built. That's decided by whoever's, whether it's a load-serving entity like, you know, Midwest or Evergy, or
You all aren't making those decisions. I just didn't know if you were seeing from state to state or different areas that restrictions are impeding that.
not to my knowledge. I mean, in fact, of all future generation plans, solar now leads at 35% of all future generation planned is solar. It's just, I think there was a rush to do wind first because we have a wind-rich area, but there's also some solar-rich areas within our region, and so we're starting to see, and quite frankly, solar and wind complement one another.
Senator Francisco?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And following up on that, you would not be reporting any solar generation that's distributed power, that's not utility solar. So there could be a fairly, I mean, maybe a whole 1%.
Yeah, yeah, if it's on a rooftop, or if it's, you drive down the highway and you see one of these small solar farms, a lot of that is, you know, if it's under 10 megawatts, it's probably not getting on the grid, the SPP grid. It's what we call behind the meter. It's just being fed straight into the distribution lines or into a facility. So we don't have any visibility into that. Good point.
I've been watching that little red mark at the bottom, and you can see it jump during the day.
Senator Clifford?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think solar's limited where I live because of a hail threat, if I was an investor. You talk about having this 15 or 16% margin on plate capacity, but I got a sense of the past that, you know, the SPP would go to a generator of power and they wouldn't be able to do it. So are you able to verify that these different generation facilities can meet the demand plus their margin?
Right, we're able to use once they're in our market, we have full visibility, and so we have historical data on, it doesn't matter if it's wind or gas or any of the above. If it's 100 megawatt nameplate, we have the data that will show what it's actually on average providing.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Senator Thompson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mike, one more. I saw a headline or a story about Governor Stitt in Oklahoma talking about unplugging from the SPP. What was the deal? Is he going ERCOT on us, or what's the deal?
No, Governor Stitt and I have gotten to be really good friends over the last month. And I actually saw some quote where he was saying some things relatively favorable about us in the last few days. We've had a good dialogue with him. He was frustrated over the amount of time it takes for us to do the studies to connect new generation. And I'm pleased to report that it's now going through our stakeholder process. And in certain instances, we're going to be able to fast track, if you will, getting new generation studies done. And what he had read about is, so Texas, because of the problems they had, $100 billion worth of economic damage and 250 lives in Winter Storm Uri. So Texas, which again is kind of like California, it's kind of like a state agency. We actually have the Panhandle in Northeast Texas because, again, they don't follow state lines, but everything else is pretty much in ERCOT. So they've got a deal called Connect and Manage. And so basically, if you want to put 500 megawatts on a line without it being studied, which 500 megawatts will cost you $1 billion, then you can do that. But anytime that line is in danger of being overloaded, you're turned off first. Most people don't want to invest $1 billion and then not know how often they're going to be able to run. That's why these studies are important, because you got to, if a line can't handle another 500 megawatts, you got to do the studies to figure out what kind of upgrades have got to be done to the line to where you can actually put that 500 megawatts on the line. And so that was something that we worked through with him, and quite frankly, it has been taking too long, not just for us, but everybody, whether you're in an RTO or not. And part of the problem is the rush to renewables, people chasing the production tax credits and all of this. So in the old days, imagine this, our peak is about south of 60,000 megawatts, 50,000 plus some. That's our peak. And if you've only got 5,000 megawatts of generation retiring every year, you would think you might have 5,000 or 10,000 megawatts under study, right, to replace it. For a 50,000 megawatt system today, we've got, well, here's the latest number, 91,500 megawatts under study on a system that only needs 50,000. So it's overwhelmed the system. Now, at the same time, if we're telling our members, you've got to raise the reserve margin on one hand, but telling you, and we'll have the study done in 2 or 3 years on the other hand, that's not fair. And so we have a provision now that we're working through the stakeholder process and will hopefully get approved to basically, for these load-serving entities and some others that find themselves in that situation, we'll be able to fast track it and have an answer. The other thing we were able to, I think, effectively explain to the governor is, and this, I'll just give you an example. This is in Oklahoma. We've got a member in Oklahoma that has ordered 500 megawatts worth of new natural gas generation. Okay, Oklahoma's a big gas state. They love that, right? So they've ordered 500 megawatts of new gas generation. It is going to be 5 years. Their vendor is telling them between getting the transformers and getting the generation built and all the parts involved in a 500 megawatt natural gas generator, it's going to be 5 years before that thing is in service. And so their point to us was, you'll have finished all your studies a year or two. Well, we're still going to be sitting around a year or two after you've done your part. And so there's more to it than just us, you know, in the equation with the supply chain issues. And then and then he's real interested in these data centers. And quite frankly, here's what's going on with that now is you need, if you got a 500 megawatt data center, that's $1 billion somebody's investing in the generation, not counting the transmission upgrade. And so some of these data centers, I guess because they have so much money, some of them are proposing to just put the generation on site and just plug into their building. And at another story that we just picked up on the last few weeks, meeting with some members out west, there were a group of members got together and they were ordering something like 500 megawatts of generation. They already had a signed contract. They had a date to take delivery. And the vendor came back and said, we're no longer going to honor this contract, and we understand there's a 20% pullout provision. And on a $1 billion deal, that means the vendor was willing to write a $200 million check to get out of the contract because the data center is willing to pay them not just that $200 million, but even more than that to basically take it away from a load-serving entity. And so, to me, that's a red flag. I mean, there's a lot going on out there right now with the rush for these data centers and as much power as they take. And so there's a lot of moving parts besides us. And I think we've had a couple of good conversations with the governor, and we've committed to work with him on it, and he's committed to work with us. And in fact, we feel good about where we are there now.
Thank you, Mike. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Well, I get a couple questions here then.
Sir.
I've been thinking about this on wind and solar outside of Kansas. When electricity goes into the grid, does the tax go with the pricing? If, like in Minnesota, they got a nameplate tax, and that's just a piece on our deal. If they put that into the system and they price what the price of wind is tax included in that or not?
I don't know.
That'd be a good thing I'd like to know sometime. That could be a big thing to us to look at type thing.
So if Minnesota is taxing the power and they're exporting the power,
Is that included in their price
Tax
into the
being-
SPP system?
I don't think it would be because, again, anyone can bid in, but we're gonna clear the lowest price. And so I guess if it was included, it would still be clearing at a price cheaper than someone else. You follow me?
Yeah. You agree with that, Andrew?
Yeah, we've talked, Andrew French, KCC. We've talked about this a little as staff because we've tossed around this idea, and that price, that tax would be reflected in what they bid into the market. So right now, you'll see, wind will bid in negative prices because they've got the production tax credit. So they're willing to take a negative price because they're going to get paid on the other end. To the extent, you add a tax on, not a tax credit, but a tax on, they may still bid in a negative number, but it'll be higher. So it would make them, if it's just Kansas, it would make them less competitive than a wind farm in Oklahoma, say. But yeah, it might still clear, just depending on where the pricing lands. Yeah.
You wouldn't want to take yourself out of the market, but there might be a gap in there you could cover up, possibly. Okay. Second question, I noticed thermal on there at 12.7%. So that's kind of a new thing we haven't really talked about here, but I think Wyoming has a plant in that. So I was wondering, where is the thermal coming from?
Gas.
That's a big number. So
It's all gas.
it's all gas? Okay. Do you envision, we got a change in Washington, I don't know if anybody's told you that or not. Does that reflect on anything that SPP's looking at in the future? I know we don't know what's going to happen with that, but as a person planning, it's kind of hard to plan right now, I would think, for a lot of people. So didn't wonder if you'd heard any conversation, or you might talk about that a minute if you would.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's too early to know. I think we'll probably see, in this new administration, we'll probably see some permitting reform. which I think would probably be good for oil and gas. And of course, we use gas, right, for
Yeah.
generation. Quite frankly, you know, we're not policy makers, we're policy takers. And whether it's state policy or federal policy, y'all just tell us what it is and we figure out how to meet it and keep the lights on. Now, those decisions can cause the price of electricity go up or go down, depending on which way it swings. But off the top of my head, I don't, you know, I think we'll probably see less regulation from the EPA. But again, you know, and it's kind of like the pendulum that keeps swinging. I mean, under the last administration, they made it more difficult for coal and gas plants to stay online without spending, you know, a lot of money to retrofit to meet new standards. Those are still being challenged in the courts. None of that was ever really implemented. And so now the pendulum will swing back, but it's still going to be probably being litigated in the courts by the 4 years from now. And so it's hard to really gauge how it's all going to shake out. But you tell us what the state and federal laws are we have to abide by, and we'll figure out a way to keep the lights on. But I think you're gonna see more of a push for dispatchable generation and less of a push for renewables. Probably you're going to see some permitting reform, which will probably make life easier for some folks in this industry.
We're due on the floor in 2 minutes. Mr. Ross, thank you. You come up from Arkansas, so thank you for your presentation, and we will adjourn the meeting. Thank you
very much.